All right, welcome to Uncensored Conservatism. This is episode number 323, and today we're going to look at some international news that may have made the headlines, but maybe not. Anyway, 250 Venezuelans in the El Salvador Supermax prison there are on their way back to Caracas, while 10 Americans held in Venezuela are on their way home. Not bad for El Salvador's president, Bukele. He gets 250 train day Aragua scumbags out of his country for 10 Americans. And that's called being an ally. A judge in Brazil has accused former leader Jair Bolsonaro of violating a ban on using social media. His crime? Giving a speech to journalists who then shared it on their social media feeds, not Bolsonaro's. This has sparked some debate in Brazil, while his son, a member of their Congress in Brazil, had his assets seized by the leftists in charge in Brazil, while the son was in the United States to drum up support for his father. 5 former or current hockey players in Canada were found not guilty of sexual assault in a London, Ontario courtroom. Now, I'm a big hockey fan, and I'm going to have more to say on this case in a future episode of Uncensored Conservatism. For now, however, they walk free. But will they play professional hockey ever again in North America? That's the big question. That's the big controversy right now in hockey. Not the fact that Canada hasn't won a Stanley Cup in like 3 decades. Well, President Trump is in Scotland at his golf course there and got in 18 holes of golf amid very tight security. Protests against Trump are planned in major cities like Aberdeen and Edinburgh. Trump is visiting for 5 days and met with the president of the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, to hammer out a trade agreement with that organization. Some British Arts Council is granting visas to hundreds of Nigerian writers, poets, oral storytellers, and dancers. It's a unique program called Literature Visas, and you can even bring your whole family from Nigeria with you and stay in Britain for up to 5 years. Yeah, diversity. Michelle Dewberry over in Britain, who won The Apprentice in 2006, is sounding the alarm about Muslim immigration to that country. The media star recently went on a blitz about the cost and concerns about assimilation. There's about 40,000 Muslims from 200 countries are scheduled to assemble in Hampshire for a conference. So, lock up the kids and women. Things got violent in Essex as protesters marched on a hotel where migrants were housed after one of the migrants was charged in a sexual assault on a British girl. Protesters threw flares at police, and at least one protester was arrested. 8 police officers were injured. The protests in Essex about the migrants being housed there managed to bring out many pro-migrant protesters also. One group, Stand Up to Racism, openly states that they are funded by Great Britain's many trade unions, and there's no surprise there. And calls are coming in hot and heavy after the protests to close all these hotels open to house migrants. Will Great Britain listen to their people? It's doubtful. The Essex police are being accused of escorting the counter-protesters to the hotel. Jonathan Gullis, the former chair of the Conservative Party, recently went on a rant, correct I might add, that recent Muslim arrivals to Britain have a medieval view of women and should be immediately deported, not welcomed. 34% of sexual assaults are attributable to foreign nationals, who make up only 11% of the population. And I'm going to tell you, Muslim men are fucking horny little devils. And proving that diversity may not be a strength in England, over the past 3 years, 312 asylum seekers have committed 708 criminal offenses. 48 of the offenses have been sexual assault, with 18 actual rapes. So lock up your wife and daughters if you have any Muslim migrant living near you in England. Don't end up as statistics. Well, migrants are being housed in hotels on the government dime in London, and now they're being accused of shoplifting in West London's expensive stores. Security guards report that 70% of shoplifters are such migrants, and that's how they repay the government's largesse, by shoplifting. All right, this is Deborah Mason, age 65, who took government benefits in England while leading a drug distribution gang. She was sentenced to over 20 years in jail. She spent her profits on trips and cosmetic surgery, which apparently didn't help much. She's known in England as the Granny Gangster, but to her gang, she's known as Queen Bee. And this could be a lesson for Democrats here in the United States. The British recently closed a tax loophole that allowed the wealthy to retain overseas earnings as long as they remained overseas. Hoping to raise $45 billion by 2030, the new law had the opposite effect, as several billionaires had left the United Kingdom, and now the government lost all their tax revenue from these people. So that's more than $45 billion to spend to house migrants in the future. And the head of the police in North Yorkshire has banned the wearing of any gay pride regalia by any police officer, or even if they participate in some gay pride march while off duty. British police are sworn to be neutral in all political or cultural affairs and not take sides or show support one way or the other. Despite the 170,000 boat people allowed into Great Britain over the past decade, the Muslim population is still only about 6% of that country. Still, they represent 90% of the names of people on their terrorist watch list in England, and who would have thunk that? The British announced that they will use live facial recognition technology when people attend the Notting Hill Carnival on August 24th. This is one of the largest gatherings in London annually. I say just, pointed at the Muslims attending. Finland's Foreign Minister Elina Valtonen expressed her concerns about corruption in Ukraine. Ukraine? Corruption? Really? Maybe they all went together. Anyway, Valtonen suggested that corruption may actually lead to Ukraine being excluded from the European Union if it ever comes to that. Membership in the EU is sought by Zelensky. And while Germany was deporting Afghans and Iraqis, which we'll get to shortly, EU ministers were meeting in Denmark to talk about what to do about what they call irregular migration and what we call illegal immigration. And they'll talk and talk and talk and talk, and nothing will get done because, human rights and all that. And what has got to be a huge example of European officials are decrying the fact that prisons there are now overcrowded, with 5 countries overflowing the number of available beds. The reason? Foreign nationals who just happen to be criminals. Really. This is kind of funny. Here, let me get you his picture in there. A diplomat assigned to Brussels from the Congo was recently arrested at the border in Bulgaria after it was discovered his van with diplomatic license plates had 200 kilograms of cocaine. He was coming into Bulgaria from Turkey, the 5th such trip he made in the past year. He initially told police his 5 suitcases contained gold, and he was heading to Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, to buy his wife a present. And that's a pretty good present. Yeah, right. Okay. The EU is considering future foreign aid to Africa and the Middle East being tied to efforts in those countries to stem the flow of illegal migrants to Europe. How well a country cooperates with returns, border controls, or readmissions into Europe after deportation would determine aid. It seems like a logical solution, and one Mr. Trump would agree with. And if you want to know why Europe is so fucked up, this is the story. A Dutch court ruled that a single man who arrived in Holland by way of Belgium, who's from Afghanistan, cannot be deported back to Belgium because conditions in Belgium are not great for single male Muslims from a shithole country. And it is therefore a human rights violation to deport him. Seriously, That is what they said. 2 women in France were hospitalized with stab wounds after being attacked by an immigrant from Afghanistan after they refused his romantic advances. That is, he wanted to rape them. However, trying to flee the scene, 20 brave Frenchmen caught the perpetrator, wrestled him to the ground, and beat the shit out of him. So, yay. And one has to ask, where were these people during World War II? Dozens of masked marauders recently took to the streets of Limoges, France, and battled with police and motorists. Armed with metal clubs and Molotov cocktails, the assailants injured 9 police officers. And there's no reason for the violence, just a bunch of goons out to kick some French butt that night. For the second time in less than 48 hours, a Catholic church in Paris was the victim of arson. No sooner had one blaze been put out, but then another, when a man entered the church, vandalized the statue, and then started a fire. There have been over 1,000 attacks on Christian churches in France over the past 3 years. I'm not going to say who did it, but if you hear Allah Akbar, you know. And this one's not just funny. French President Emmanuel Macron filed a defamation lawsuit against Candace Owens over her assertions that Macron's wife is really a man. For the record, these assertions by Owens are not new, and they actually originated in France. However, looking at that face, not going to go there. And speaking of Macron, he announced that France will officially recognize a state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly, which really pissed off Marco Rubio and other American officials. Of course, Macron does not specify where this state exists. Regardless, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, again suggested the French Riviera as a possible Palestinian homeland. Center-left German politician Daniel Born stepped down from his leadership position after he admitted he drew a swastika next to the name of an AfD party member on a ballot. The left hates the AfD with a passion and equates them with Nazis. But drawing a swastika in Germany can get you 3 years in jail. I doubt that's going to happen with this guy, but, 18-year-olds in Germany may soon have to answer whether they'd be willing to join the military, and in 2028 they'll undergo physical screenings for military service regardless of their willingness. Now, conscription over there ended in 2011, and that may be next. And the reason is Russian military adventurism in Europe. For 2 years, the German economy has been shrinking, and now there are reports that the shadow economy is booming. Undeclared work has surged to 11% of the entire German economy. The reason? High taxation with little to show for it in return. Germany announced that over the past year, 99% of all cases of actual or alleged terrorism were attributable to, wait for it, Islamic extremism. This, after the government is stating the rise of right-wing extremism is a major threat to Germany. And who are the bad guys? Where are they from? It would come as no surprise. They hail from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Immigration officials in Berlin are being rewarded with, being rewarded with perks for the number of naturalizations of this foreign scum over the past year, when most applicants are not even seen in person. Gee, what could go wrong here? Maybe 99.5% of terrorism cases attributed to Islamic extremism. Germany and Poland may extend the practice of border checks after the end of August in an effort to stem the flow of illegal immigration. It sounds like a great idea, and why just through August initially was never explained. I guess illegal immigrants they stop on September 1st. First, some Afghanistans and now 43 Iraqis, all single males and all with criminal records, were flown out of Germany to Baghdad in yet another deportation effort. No word on whether Chris Van Hollen will fly to Iraq and try to have a margarita with them. Large-scale brawls broke out in Berlin's multicultural vetting district recently, leading to multiple stabbings and people in the hospital. It would appear that Berlin needs to pass some common-sense knife control measures like We just keep them out of the hands of the Muslims. Muhammad I of Germany, originally, look at this pretty town, originally from Syria, age 18, was sentenced to 2 years probation after he kidnapped a 13-year-old German boy, tased him, and then made him lick the inside of a garbage can for over 3 hours of humiliation, and then filmed the incident. Obviously, local residents are outraged. 2 years probation for that. Germany deported several Afghan criminals back to Kabul recently, and that has the left in Germany all upset. Said one left-wing politician, they'll only be killed by the Taliban or end back up in Germany, so what's the use? And I'm not so sure about that latter part. Once in Kabul, it'll be kind of hard to get back out. The Taliban, they don't fuck around. Claudia Plackholm, the youth minister in Austria, recently said that the Muslim headscarf for girls is a sign of oppression, and that has caused the Muslim community to rise up in anger. This occurred as racial and religious tensions are rising in Austria. Hitler was born in Austria, by the way. Muslims now make up 41% of the student body in Austria schools, compared to a little over 34% Christian. Anti-immigration rallies and protests have taken place recently throughout Poland, as many are calling recent high-profile criminal acts by immigrants a threat to security and Polish culture. Gee, you think? Counter-protesters showed up in Warsaw, although police they kept everything pretty peaceful. Massive protests have broken out in Ukraine after Zelensky placed the country's two major anti-corruption agencies under the control of the federal prosecutor. The move by Zelensky was rejected by protesters and some within the European Union. Major protests against Zelensky during a war. May not be good. In a hearty fuck you to the European Union, Hungary and Serbia have entered into an agreement to build a crude oil pipeline into that country. Some of that oil will come from Russia, thus setting up a confrontation between Budapest and Brussels. Currently, most Russian oil flows through Ukraine, but Kiev, that's Kiev, recently shut down a vital pipeline that goes to Hungary and Slovakia. And speaking of Slovakia, they have entered into a deal with Westinghouse to construct a $17.6 billion nuclear plant in that country after previously rejecting a proposal from South Korea. And that's how you do it. Wean yourself from Russian energy and no greenhouse gases to boot. You hear that, Greta? In Romania, despite his repressive regime, a recent poll shows that over 66% of people believe former communist strongman Nicolae Ceausescu was a good leader. This, despite the fact that 80% of the respondents in that poll were aware of his repression and sometimes brutality. Vladimir Putin of Russia recently signed a law that would allow those from Belarus permanently living in Russia to vote in elections and run for office. Russia and Belarus are very close political and military allies. Italy has reported their 16th consecutive year of declining births, with, on average, only 1.18 babies per woman of childbearing age, the lowest total on record. A fertility rate of 2.1 is needed to maintain the population, so come on, Italian women, spread those legs and get to it. Mohamed Galloul, shown there on the left, a 30-year-old from Tunisia, was sentenced to 30 years in jail for the murder of Alice Neri in Italy. Neri's car was discovered burned with her body in the trunk with 7 stab wounds. Galloul fled Italy but was arrested in France, and of course he denies his guilt, but diversity is a strength. Greek officials recently arrested and have detained 247 boat migrants who made the trip from Libya, as Greece has decided to crack down on illegal immigration and not grant asylum. They will be detained until Libya agrees to take their return or a third country takes them. Bottom line, the Greek gravy train is over. So reports coming out of Gaza is that Israeli Defense Forces are shooting at civilians coming to receive humanitarian aid. Israel and the United States are largely providing that aid because when the UN did it, it was being stolen by Hamas. which is well documented. Now, before we believe these stories, however, remember that this information comes largely from Al Jazeera and Hamas spokesman citing the ubiquitous unnamed Israeli soldiers. So let's just hold our judgment on this. The Nelson Mandela Foundation in South Africa is offering rewards of up to $8,500 for fighting so-called Christian Zionism. What the hell is that, you ask? It's, according to the foundation, combining Christian biblical prophecy with Israeli colonialism. So now the Jews are colonists on their own land. There is no Palestine. It's called Judea Samaria. India is rechecking the electoral rolls of some 80 million people in the northeastern state of Bihar. The government said they are making sure everything is kosher for upcoming elections, while others say the government is targeting primarily Muslim voters in the province. Bihar is known to have many illegal Bengalis. And by the way, India has expelled at least 1,500 Bengalis back across the border into Bangladesh. Human rights people are claiming the Indian government is targeting Muslims after a deadly attack in Kashmir against Hindu tourists by Muslims. The government claims the deported are in the country illegally. Like the Taliban, the Indian don't fool around. F-16s from Thailand recently launched attacks inside Cambodia, killing 11 civilians and one member of the Cambodian military as tensions mount between the countries over a border dispute. The hostilities are threatening to throw the region into a larger conflict as the United States is supportive of Thailand and China of Cambodia. This is the worst violence since 2011, when an international tribunal ruled most of the contested territory belonged to Cambodia. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba vowed to remain in power despite the loss of a ruling majority in parliament after right-wing populist parties made significant gains. A vote of no confidence, however, could force him from power. As usual, immigration is a major concern in Japan, as well as protection of their unique culture and customs. And finally, this is the island of Funafuti, the largest island in some Pacific country called Tuvalu. Now, Australia is offering climate visas to residents of that country as the Pacific laps at their shores. So far, over 8,000 people have applied for visas of the 10,000 total population of Tuvalu. 9 islands make up Tuvalu, and so far 2 have disappeared under the ocean. Folks, they're friggin' coral atolls in the South Pacific that a few people live on, and none of them are named Gilligan. And they go underwater and they come out of the water. They go under the water and they come out of the water. It's not climate change. Anyway, that's it. It looks like a nice place for Gilligan to live, but other than that, they got that little park there. I guess I don't know what that is. And here's the town over here, and there's where Epstein lives up there. But anyway, that's it for today. Thanks. Have a great day and a more pleasant tomorrow. Don't know what I'm doing tomorrow, though. Bye.